The desert wind carried sand across the rusted corrugated walls of Outpost B-17, whispering through loose metal panels like a tired ghost. The sun hadn't risen yet, only a pale band of silver stretched along the far horizon. In the half-light, the hangar felt less like a military facility and more like some forgotten ribcage, its beams jutting upward like the bones of something ancient. Inside, Sergeant Miles Harrow wiped the grease from his palms and leaned over the half-assembled airfield cruiser. He had been the outpost's mechanic for 3 years, but it had never stopped feeling like exile, a place they assigned men who had survived too much and spoken too little. The cruiser, a reinforced low-profile transport vehicle with retractable plating, was meant to escort convoys through the no-fly canyon south of the outpost. Its armored side panels could withstand debris gunfire, even the shock waves from low-altitude passes. But lately the desert storms and tremors had been rougher than usual, and the vehicle had begun to groan like an overworked horse. Miles reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the object he always checked before touching a machine. A small dented dog tag edges burned smooth. The lettering had been scorched by a fire years ago. T. ITO Seapul, 3rd Imperial Air Wing, captured, 1944. The token wasn't his, it belonged to the man who had once tried to kill him, the man who would soon walk back into his life. Miles closed his fist around the dog tag and slipped it back into his pocket, grounding himself the way he always did before working on the cruiser. Machines, unlike memories, didn't lie. A voice sounded at the hangar door. "You're early, Harrow." He didn't have to look. Captain Lenton's boots always clicked too fast for the size of the man wearing them. "Couldn't sleep," Miles said, still tightening a bolt. "Storm radar says we're expecting turbulence along the ridge. Keep the cruiser strictly to spec today, no modifications." Lenton slapped a clipboard on the table. "Command is sending an inspection." Miles frowned. "Inspection out here?" Apparently, Lenton said, lowering his voice. "Some former enemy pilot wants to tour our facility. Some kind of post-war reconciliation program." Miles felt the wrench slip slightly in his grip. Lenton didn't notice. "Whatever you do, don't touch the underside plating. Last time you reinforced something without authorization, we got 3 days of paperwork." "Copy," Miles murmured. A second voice, gentle, unfamiliar, floated into the hangar. Sergeant Harrow Miles turned. For a heartbeat, the past collapsed into the present like collapsing scaffolding. Standing at the entrance, leaning on a cane, was a man about his age, gray at the temples, posture careful but proud. He wore a visitor badge and a soft expression that didn't match the weight in his eyes. Miles recognized him instantly. Kazuo Ito, the man who had once been his enemy, the man whose dog tag he still carried. Lenton, oblivious to the emotional landmine between them, clapped his hands. "Sergeant, this is Mr. Kazuo Ito, former Imperial pilot. He'll be observing maintenance operations today." Kazuo bowed slightly. "Harrow-san, it has been a long time." Miles couldn't speak. He felt the dog tag in his pocket burn like a coal. Lenton cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to it. Remember, no deviations from the maintenance order." The captain left. For a long moment the hangar was quiet, except for the desert wind tapping at the metal walls. Kazuo's gaze drifted to the cruiser. "You still work with your hands," he said softly. Miles swallowed. "It's what I know." Kazuo nodded almost wistfully. "I remember." Memories surged smoke fire, the sky tearing open the desperate dive into a canyon, the wreckage, the capture, the prison camp. And then the day the war ended, when both of them somehow survived, while so many didn't. Miles forced himself to breathe. "Why are you here?" Ito Kazuo's shoulders rose and fell. "To see what remains, to see whether the world we damaged can still be repaired." Miles didn't answer. He turned back to the cruiser. Kazuo stepped closer. "May I watch?" Miles hesitated, but nodded. There were no orders about refusing visitors. Yet. For the next hour, Miles worked in silence while Kazuo observed with the respectful stillness of a museum visitor watching a fragile artifact. Occasionally he took notes. Occasionally his gaze drifted not to the cruiser, but to Miles's hands, his tools, the exact movements with which he assessed the vehicle's joints and plates. Kazuo finally spoke. "This cruiser, its plating is lighter than I expected. "It's standard model 3F," Miles said. "Fast enough to escort, strong enough to deflect." Kazuo tapped the metal gently with his knuckles. "Not strong enough for a canyon crosswind." Miles paused. "You flew those crosswinds." "I did," Kazuo replied. "They were the only thing more dangerous than bullets." Miles tightened a bolt until it clicked sharply. "Orders say I'm not supposed to reinforce anything today." Kazuo's eyes narrowed. "Why inspection?" "Protocol. Red tape. Take your pick." Kazuo stepped beside him, lowering his voice. "Wind does not respect paperwork." A tremor hummed beneath the hangar floor as if to punctuate his words. Miles stiffened. That wasn't normal. Kazuo looked toward the sky through the open hangar doors. "The clouds have a strange coloration. Pressure is shifting. A downdraft may be forming." Miles felt his jaw tighten. "We're in the middle of the outpost. Nothing flies over us." Kazuo gave him a look he remembered all too well, calm, perceptive, quietly fatalistic. "Haro-san, the sky does not ask permission." A low, distant rumble echoed across the desert. Not thunder. Not machinery. Miles set his wrench down. "Ito, what do you know that we don't?" Kazuo inhaled. "A squadron from my country used to test gliding maneuvers in this region. The canyons create unpredictable air currents. If the storm front shifts and any plane passes low, the outpost will suffer damage." Miles froze. His mind leapt involuntarily to the dog tag in his pocket, to the day Kazuo's plane had crashed, to the sound of a hull tearing apart. He steadied himself. "Command hasn't briefed us on any flyovers." Kazuo held his gaze. "That doesn't mean there won't be one." The hangar lights flickered twice. Miles exhaled slowly. "If something happens, this cruiser won't hold." "Unless," reinforced, Kazuo said. "Which I'm not allowed to do." Kazuo's voice softened. "Sometimes the order is wrong." Miles stared at him. Kazuo Ito, the man who once tried to cut his convoy off from the supply line, the man he had faced through fire and shrapnel, was telling him to break orders, telling him to reinforce a cruiser against the sky itself. Miles felt the weight of 2 decades settle into his bones. "You're asking me to disobey command," he said. Kazuo shook his head. "I am asking you to protect the men who trust you." The wind picked up suddenly, slamming the hangar door against its stopper. Miles made his decision. "Close the doors," he said. "We don't have much time." Kazuo moved without hesitation. Miles rolled the tool cart to the far corner of the hangar, uncovered a crate he wasn't supposed to have, and pulled out 2 strips of composite alloy plating. Kazuo watched with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Where did you get those?" Miles shrugged. "Army throws out a lot of things." "I don't." Kazuo nodded. "Good. War wastes enough." They worked together, one mechanic and one former pilot sliding under the cruiser to assess the undercarriage. Kazuo held a lantern as Miles examined the frame. "There," Kazuo said, pointing to a thin section near the front axle. "This is where stress will concentrate during a downdraft impact." Miles touched the spot, feeling the faint give of metal. "You're right." He hated that he said it. He loved that it was true. He placed the composite strip across the weak point. "Hand me the bolt driver." Kazuo passed it to him immediately. Minutes turned into half an hour. Sweat dripped into the dust. The cruiser's frame slowly changed from fragile simplicity to a reinforced spine capable of withstanding something far greater than its design ever imagined. Kazuo wiped his brow. "You move with certainty." Miles smirked slightly. "Machines talk. I listen." Kazuo's expression softened. "People talk too. Sometimes we do not listen to them." Miles paused mid-bolt. The air between them shifted. Kazuo continued, voice low. "I carried guilt for many years. The day I crashed, I fired on your convoy. You were there, were you not?" Miles swallowed. "Yes." Kazuo bowed his head. "I am sorry." Miles felt the wrench loosen in his grip. He looked at Kazuo, the same man who once flew as his enemy, and for the first time he didn't see an opponent. He saw another survivor, another man who carried weight no words could lighten. Miles exhaled. "War put us on opposite sides. You did what you were told." Kazuo nodded. "And now you do what you must." Another tremor rattled the hangar. Miles tightened the final reinforcement plate. "It's done." Kazuo stepped out from beneath the cruiser. "Good, because we are running out of time." As they stood, the hangar, Radio crackled to life, broadcasting a hurried voice. Unidentified aircraft approaching low altitude. Possible malfunction, ground crews prepare for turbulence. Repeat. Miles and Kazuo locked eyes. This was no hypothetical. Something was coming, something that could tear the outpost apart. Miles grabbed his gloves. "Ito, get in the cruiser. We're moving it to the open field." Kazuo hesitated. To shield the others, Miles nodded once. "Exactly." Kazuo climbed inside without arguing. Miles ran to the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and the cruiser roared to life. Outside, the wind screamed like something alive. Miles gripped the wheel. Kazuo braced himself. Above them, the sky darkened, and the past, long buried under dust and silence, prepared to collide with the present one final time. The cruiser rolled out of the hangar and into the storm-brewing airfield, its reinforced frame groaning as the crosswind shoved against it. Dust spun in vicious spirals across the tarmac. The control tower lights flashed amber, signaling emergency lockdown procedures. Kazuo held onto the passenger grip. "The downdraft, it's worse than I expected." Miles didn't reply. His jaw was set, eyes fixed on the horizon where a trembling shape appeared, dark, low, shuddering. A plane. Not enemy, not friendly. Just a plane in trouble. The radio barked again. Unidentified aircraft, losing stability, repeating, losing stability. Impact trajectory, uncertain, ground crews take cover. Miles exhaled sharply. "Damn it, Linton's still in the tower. They won't get out in time." Kazuo's voice was calm, too calm. "Position us between the aircraft and the hangars. Use the cruiser as an anchor." Miles gave him a look. "Anchor against a falling aircraft. Against its wind," Kazuo said. "The drag and shockwave. The frame can hold if you trust your own work." The words hit deeper than the storm. Miles gritted his teeth and swung the cruiser left tires, kicking up a halo of dust as he steered toward the open field between the hangars and the incoming aircraft. The air trembled. A scream of metal tore across the sky. Kazuo leaned forward, peering through the windshield. "It is coming in at a shallow angle. If the downdraft pulls it lower, it will crash into the barracks." "Not if we hold the line." Miles braked hard, turning the cruiser sideways broadside to the wind, forming a wall of reinforced steel between the outpost and the approaching aircraft. The crosswind slammed into the vehicle, rocking it violently. Kazuo grabbed the handle above the door. "You built this well, Haro-san." Miles shoved the gear into park and planted his boots against the floor. "Let's hope so." Then the downdraft hit. The wind burst across the outpost like a charging beast. Sand stung the windows, debris skittered across the tarmac, and the entire cruiser shuddered as if struck by a giant's hand. Kazuo braced his arms against the dashboard. "Hold steady." Miles leaned his entire weight into the steering wheel muscles, straining as the reinforced frame absorbed the initial blast of pressure. A second shockwave followed, stronger, angrier, generated by the erratic aircraft's failing engines and chaotic altitude shifts. The cruiser groaned but held. Miles could almost hear the composite plating beneath them, flexing, stretching, but not breaking. Kazuo closed his eyes for a moment. "This is like the cross-canyon gusts, the ones we trained for. I never thought I would experience it from the ground." Miles shot him a sideways glance. "Did you ever think you'd be sitting inside a cruiser with the guy you tried to bomb?" Kazuo gave a bitter smile. "No. Life is strange." Another shockwave hit. This one rattled the windshield. The aircraft loomed close now, flying barely 20 meters above the ground. Its right wing dipped dangerously, scraping the tips of the radio tower antenna. Miles exhaled through clenched teeth. "If it drops any lower, it will cartwheel," Kazuo said, "and tear the entire outpost apart." The cruiser shook violently. "It's now or never," Miles muttered. Kazuo nodded. "Haro-san, do you trust me?" Miles didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I do." Kazuo pointed forward. "When the next gust hits ease the wheel 10 degrees right, the cruiser will tilt just enough to deflect the air upward." Miles frowned. "Use the cruiser to redirect the downdraft." "Yes," Kazuo said. "Turn your wall into a ramp. The wind will rise instead of flattening us. It'll stress the frame." Kazuo met his eyes. "You reinforced the frame." Miles swallowed once, then he nodded. 10 degrees. I've got it." The aircraft roared overhead, its tail spinning smoke. The wind began to build again, Miles recognized the vibration in the steel, the eerie stillness before impact. Now, Hero-san Kazuo shouted. Miles eased the wheel right just as the gale slammed into them. The cruiser angled. The wind struck its reinforced side and lifted. Dust spiraled upward behind them, kicked skyward by the deflected gust. A metal sheet from a fuel shed flew toward them only to be pushed up and over the cruiser by the redirected wind. Kazuo's eyes widened. It worked. Miles didn't smile. He pushed harder, steadying the vehicle's angle. The aircraft struggled overhead like a wounded bird. Its wing clipped the top of a storage container, but the redirected gust gave just enough lift to keep the plane from diving into the barracks. Kazuo pressed a hand against the windshield. You bought it seconds. That may be enough. Miles gripped the wheel with whitening knuckles. Seconds. Better count. The aircraft's nose dipped, then rose, then dipped again in a dying rhythm. Smoke streamed from both engines. The pilot, whoever he was, fought desperately to keep the craft airborne. The loudspeaker crackled. Ground crew vehicle on the field, hold your position. Miles ignored it. Kazuo whispered, he is losing control. If he tries to land on the east strip, he will overshoot. Miles's jaw tightened. He's not trying to land. Kazuo's breath caught as realization dawned. He is aiming for the dry creek bed. It's the only place without people. The aircraft tilted left, then right, then flattened just enough to skim the horizon. The pilot was doing everything possible to crash where the impact would cause the least damage. Miles exhaled. He's one hell of a pilot. Kazuo nodded slowly. They usually are. The aircraft dropped another 10 meters. The downdraft surged again, hard enough to blow sand into the cracks of the cruiser's windows. Kazuo braced himself. This one will be strong. Miles didn't blink. Let it come. And it came. The largest shockwave of them all, explosive, violent, roaring across the tarmac like a wall of invisible fire. Miles felt the world tilt. The cruiser slammed backward an inch, then stopped anchored by its reinforced frame and the weight of 2 men holding their ground. The wind lifted. The aircraft stabilized barely. Miles whispered, "Come on! Come on!" The plane sailed past them, wobbling like a drunk giant, then dipped out of sight behind the ridge. A distant thud echoed seconds later, heavy final. Kazuo closed his eyes. The creek bed. Miles clenched the steering wheel, but didn't speak. The wind finally began to die. The outpost was safe. For now. The cruiser's engine hummed quietly as the dust settled around them. Miles cut the ignition, and both men sat in silence, breathing hard sweat cooling on their skin. Kazuo finally spoke. "You disobeyed orders." Miles let out a weak laugh. "You helped." Kazuo smiled faintly. "Yes, I suppose I did." The radio crackled again. Unidentified aircraft down. No ground casualties. Rescue team mobilizing. Miles leaned back exhausted. Kazuo rubbed his palms together. "Hero-san, may I ask something?" "Sure. Why did you keep my dog tag all these years?" Miles froze. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the dented, scorched tag. He placed it gently in Kazuo's palm. Kazuo stared at it, emotion rising in his eyes. "I thought it was lost forever. It was burned into the glove of a soldier who didn't make it," Miles said quietly. "I found it after the camp was liberated." Kazuo bowed his head. "I am sorry. For everything I did, for everything I thought, for the man I was." Miles shook his head. "We both lived in a world built by orders. Some right, some wrong." Kazuo brushed the metal with his thumb. "And now you have given this back." Miles nodded. "It belongs to you." Kazuo closed his fist around the dog tag, then hesitated. He opened his hand again. "Hero-san," he said softly, "I want you to keep it." Miles blinked. "Why?" Kazuo inhaled shakily. "Because today you returned something far more important. You returned my belief that men can change, that enemies can become witnesses to each other's humanity." Miles swallowed. "Itto." Kazuo lifted the dog tag and pressed it gently into Miles's palm. "Let it be a memory not of war, but of what we stopped today." Miles felt his throat tighten. He nodded. Then the hangar sirens erupted, signaling command's approach. "They're coming to chew my ass out," Miles muttered. Kazuo gave him a tiny, mischievous smile. Then I will stand beside you. Miles snorted. You're a civilian. You don't take orders. Kazuo bowed slightly. Neither it seems to you. Captain Linton stormed across the airfield, face-red uniform flapping 2 officers running behind him. Harrow, what in God's name? He stopped when he saw the cruiser. The reinforced plates, the dust-scoured frame, the trail of debris that showed exactly how the cruiser had stood between the outpost and the storm. Linton swallowed. You turned the cruiser into a barrier. Kazuo stepped forward. He turned it into an air defense wall. Linton blinked. A what? Kazuo gestured toward the sky. His modifications allowed the wind to redirect upward. Had he followed the checklist, the downdraft would have leveled the hangars. Miles waited for the explosion. Instead, Linton's expression changed slowly, like a man rethinking a lifetime of assumptions. You saved the outpost, he said quietly. Miles said nothing. Kazuo stepped closer. Captain, I was a pilot. I have flown through winds like these, and I can tell you plainly without this man's judgment, many would have died. Linton looked at Miles. Miles met his gaze expecting punishment. Instead, the captain nodded once. I'll file the report, and I'll make sure command sees the truth. Miles let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Later, as the sun dipped low and the rescue team recovered the pilot alive, miraculously alive, Miles and Kazuo stood near the battered cruiser. Kazuo placed a hand on the reinforced side panel. It feels different now. Miles nodded. It stood its ground. Kazuo turned to him. As did you. They stood for a long moment, the desert wind finally gentle. Kazuo broke the silence. May I ask one more thing? Miles raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. Kazuo extended his hand. Not a soldier's handshake, not a formal bow, just a simple human gesture. Miles took it. Their hands clenched a mechanic and a former pilot men who once lived on opposite sides of a war neither of them asked for. Kazuo smiled. Thank you for breaking the order. Miles returned the smile. Thank you for helping me rebuild one. The wind shifted, lifting a thin swirl of dust around their boots. Kazuo looked at the horizon. Perhaps peace is not something governments sign. Perhaps it is something people choose. Miles nodded. Maybe it's something we build. One plate at a time. Kazuo chuckled softly. Or one reinforced cruiser. Miles exhaled, the weight in his chest finally easing. Yeah, that too. As the last light faded across Outpost B-17, Kazuo Ito stepped beside the man who had once been his enemy. Now his witness, now quietly, undeniably, his friend. The sky above them was silent. The storm had passed, and somewhere between the broken order and the rebuilt machine, 2 men had found something far stronger than steel. They had found reconciliation,